Western religions, I should say maybe the main religions, they're all based on this idea of transcendence, including Christianity, of course. And I feel like this is one of the crucial ideas that's gotten us in so much trouble. First Nations people don't really have the same idea. And what I started to learn from them was a different way. And I call it Incendence. The only way we're going to get out of this mess that we're in, individually and collectively, is through that way, is through Incendence.
Into the fire, here we go. Into the fire, head to toe. Into the fire, to be seen. Into the fire, to be.
Hello, this is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. I'm here today with a guest from out east. So this is the first person that I will have had on the podcast who's not from the immediate area, either from the Salmon Arm area or British Columbia in general. Actually, I had a woman from Alberta, but I have a very deep connection to the land out in Alberta, ceremonially speaking. And so there's a community there. I'm connected to a community that she's a part of. And so we know each other in that context. So today there's a connection through I don't even know what you'd call it, this web that exists of connection outside of a human connection that exists because of technology, because of the internet. I saw on Facebook a post that somebody that I've never actually met, but who does live close by, and we do have friends in common. So we do have that human connection in common. We're one step away from meeting, and we will meet someday. His name's Justin Yao, and he posted about the Sacred Gardener School and a couple that live out in the Upper Ottawa Valley, and the school, as I said, is called the Sacred Gardener School. And of course, we're the Sacred Village podcast. And so that grabbed my attention. But then as I delved a little bit deeper into it, I was very intrigued. I followed their Facebook page, and now I'm speaking to Stephen Martyn, who is the head teacher at the Sacred Gardener School. And so we're brought together in a really intriguing way for me, because I think, I'll let Stephen speak to this, but we both have values and we both have a part of us. I'm sensing that is, longing for that deeper connection to the earth, to the plants, to the humans, to that deeper connection that obviously Facebook can only, peripherally supply. It's almost like it begins to become an agent of connection, but it's ultimately a trickery. It's artificial, but it does have the ability to be a conduit. It can be a tool. It can be used wisely, like everything else in the world, like AI, as this comes in, and other forms of technology that have the ability to get out of hand. They can be used wisely. They can be used for for deeper connection that can happen over technology through Zoom or through whatever portal we're using. But yeah, here we are, Stephen Martyn. Introduce yourself if you don't mind, and just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you found your path.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me on. Well, the introducing yourself thing, is always an interesting thing, because really, what is yourself? And who are you? As soon as you start to talk about it, you are already losing something. But just to say, gonna look a long path, a lot of years. It started really when I was about 19. I would say I was completely disillusioned with Western culture. And so coming from the suburbs of a big city, Toronto, I had connection with farms and northern woodlands and stuff like that growing up, but I was basically a suburban kid. And I would say coming from complete spiritual poverty, like a place that's an absolute wasteland, which, most of this planet we're turning into that. I mean, these suburbs, and there's some whole states that I would consider a wasteland in terms of having no authentic culture. And that's what I'm calling a wasteland, where it's all been contrived post-World War II, this kind of bubble that, we're still kind of contending with that was created then. So I grew up in this kind of, not affluence, but in comfort and all the privilege that a white North American person would have. But man, oh man, all hollowed out on the inside. And I knew it when I was a kid. I was a pretty different kind of kid, but I didn't have any words for it. You know how that goes. So you just know that you don't like any of this. And so when I came of age and I was able to, I left it all behind. And I went and learned how to live in the bush and forage and trap for my food and find my medicine. And my whole spiritual orientation was towards the earth and trying to do something positive for her with my life, because I just feel like it's so difficult to have good work, and I wasn't thinking this back then, but in retrospect, I see that like so much of our work, especially for men, I'd have to say, has to do with destruction, right? But somewhere down the line, like even if you're a builder, there's how did that space get claimed? Where did all the materials come from? How are you building? Blah, blah, blah. So even things that don't appear like they're destructive, you're adding to this mess that we've created. So how do you live, let alone make a living? Because those are two different things, without adding to the pile of destruction. A way that, can be helping the earth and taking away from that kind of lost path. So being so disillusioned, went into the bush, and I was a Buddhist at the time, practiced Buddhism, all my meditation techniques, all the way I was thinking about everything was Buddhist when I went into the bush. But when I came out, it was a different thing. I spent 4 years more or less alone in the bush, and I had some interaction with Indigenous people during that time. And one of the things that started to come to me was that Western religions, and Buddhism included, it's Eastern religion, but I should say maybe the main religions, they're all based on this idea of transcendence, including Christianity, of course. And I feel like this is one of the crucial ideas that's gotten us in so much trouble. And First Nations people don't really have the same idea. And what I started to learn from them was a different way. And I call it Incendence. So it's going into this physical reality and working with it. And in my opinion, the only way we're going to get out of this mess that we're in, individually and collectively, is through that way, is through Incendence. Transcendence has created disaster because ultimately we think the earth is evil because of all these ideas that there's another realm somehow that's separate from this. And I can pretty much tell you that's a fallacy. There are other realms, but they're not separate from this. They all stem from this one. I like this idea that we live in a 3-dimensional reality, So there's depth, there's width, there's length. But if you look at something like a tube, there's also a dimension inside. And so as it turns out, it's pretty much physically, through physics and mathematics, it can be proven that we live in a 10-dimensional reality. But we only can perceive 3 of the dimensions. The 4th dimension is emotional. We can feel that one. But then there's still 6 more dimensions. And so all of these things, like how we're all so interconnected, how the ancestors who are past can be so present, how we can be present at a distance, all of these things can kind of be explained through this 10-dimensional reality. Or to some degree, can at least be pointed at, if not explained, that there is a plausible kind of reality there, and it's not separate from this one. People have written about it and talked about it for millennia, and those have been misunderstood and then turned into dogma and then repeated ad nauseum, but nobody really kind of knows what this heavenly realm or hell or these things like just to use Christianity for an example. These places absolutely exist in the etheric. There's no doubt about it, but it's not just these two places, and we don't just go there, and it's not about punishment, and it's not about any of that stuff. So again, then at the end of the 4 years in the bush, I started to have these dreams, and this woman would come and hover over me. And I've been celibate the whole time, and it didn't really feel sexual, but she was calling me out. And that and a bunch of other stuff that happened all felt like Spirit was just like, okay, you've got enough to work with. Now you have to go back and you have to share what you have, right? You've got enough. And I kind of, so that's kind of been my mission, I suppose, is to spread the green gospel, spread the word, and I'm charged with that. And I started to slack off on it at a certain point and, got caught up in business. I had this tea company, herbal tea company and stuff. Struggling and not really putting myself out there in any kind of way as a teacher or a healer. And right on time, I got Lyme disease, and in a very, very severe way, like life-threatening. And so that was like, okay, buddy, like, this is your chance. It's either this or it's time for you to go. And so, I ever since then, I shifted. We started the school. So I've been teaching about the plants and medicine and edible food and all those things, indigenous skills for about 30 years. But the spiritual thing was always background. I didn't want to scare people away, that kind of thing. A white guy talking about earth spirituality too, highly problematic thing these days. I'm sure you've come across it yourself. Anyways, it kind of was just made super clear to me that, like, this is the only option you have here, So I kind of, I think it's important when we think about our path that we recognize how little control we actually have, that our path isn't really up to us. And you know what they say, you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans, right? So this is the thing, is as humans, we have to make plans. We have to plot a course. It's just how our brain works or whatever. We got to have plans. But the adherence to those plans is our problem, Like, we have to make plans to get up out of bed and move forward in the day, but then we get trapped in our own little dogma or our own little, cell of belief, and then we're not seeing reality anymore, and all these opportunities can just pass you by, and you won't even see them because you're on your path with your blinders on and, trying to get to the end of that thing. So, this is one of the things I teach in the school a lot, is that there's this, seeming dichotomy in a spiritual life, which is that you have to have plans, you have to have aspirations, you have to have ideals, but these are all the very things that trap us further down the road. So I guess that, yeah. So maybe I'll stop talking for a bit.
Well, that's a really good introduction. I really appreciate that. What stood out for me was the human obsession with permanence. Like, even speaking of the religions and of the other realms, there's even the way we speak of them almost, for me, conjures like an implication of permanence when that couldn't be further from the truth. It is but it's also, there is truth to it in the sense, because there's something even, in even the immaterial, the spiritual, it has this structure, like it has this energetic sort of existence, like consciousness, like it woven within a tapestry that is far beyond our, ability to comprehend, but it still exists. So there is something sort of material almost, but not quite. And so in being able to, hold on to this connection to something that our mind can try to understand, but the necessity to create the thought to give us coherence and then to throw it out right away, to destroy it, as, going back to the destruction, like even the Mandalas that are created in, many spiritual modalities, or, they're meant to be impermanent. So there is obviously the degradation of plants, the cyclical nature of plants, the destruction. That is something that is so natural, and yet I don't know. It's almost as though the destructive impulse that comes out of the anger that is really misplaced anger, but it's actually directed at God for things not being permanent, and so I'm going to destroy it.
Interesting.
But then you are playing into a larger paradigm of, growth and regrowth and, resurrection and in different ways. But can we be a part of that cycle in a more gentle and a more mindful way, I suppose? I mean, that's what comes to me anyways, but
One of the
the
things
mindfulness
I talk about in my new book, Their Gnosis, is this idea that there's a spiritual ecology. It's very similar to this physical ecology, and that in fact it is the precursor of this physical ecology. There wouldn't be this without that. And so, like in those ecologies, like if we look out here, by our judgment, by our ethical, moral understanding of things, sometimes things look pretty harsh out in this physical reality. We would even say maybe evil, like some people might kind of go there or whatever. But anyways, I feel like the spiritual reality is the same. Those beings need to be fed, and they will get their food one way or another.
yeah, one way or another.
One way or another. And they've been getting it the hard way for us for maybe 2,000, maybe 4,000 years.
Yeah.
Which is they're
Totally.
being fed by our fear and our destruction, by war.
Yeah. And that
Yahweh and different deities that we've held up for this length of time, and that we are constantly feeding with blood offerings. Like if you think about circumcision and things like that, like it's pretty dark stuff,
Well,
and so we have to be so careful what we feed, right? And how we're feeding things.
Yeah, if we have the capacity to choose to be careful, if we have that level of consciousness to see what we're actually doing, which comes back to, doing what you're doing, the school of, the sacred gardener, and being next door to the school, the former school of the orphan wisdom with Stephen Jenkinson is this impetus or this I have it as well, which is like a deep calling from my own pain, my own experience going through suffering of not having the connection that I needed as a human being. And I look around at, my brothers, they seem to have had the connection that they needed, but I didn't even come close. So there's also this, the different callings that we have, the different karmic kind of path that we have, but we certainly have to respond to it, because I can guarantee that there's other people like you and I, the younger versions of us, and maybe even the older versions of us, if they haven't been so blessed as to have found this path, that are suffering deeply. And so, of course, it's our responsibility to do what we're doing as best we can, which is to invite, to teach, to give back in the way that we've been shown by the teachers that we've been blessed to come across and to be of service to. But I will comment on the dark. The dark is also a teacher, like in the tradition that I'm learning, the highest level teachers. And I work with ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is my guru, and I go to Peru and I have a teacher down there, and very much in alignment. I feel very austere about that kind of thing. But I have a friend who also works with this medicine, and her highest teacher happens to be a meditation teacher that has no interest in plant medicine whatsoever. And she'll go to this highest level teacher for cleaning. And what his position is, and what I've seen also, as the teachings are progressing, is that there's no such thing. When you're working at the highest level, you're not repelling anything. You're not sending anything away dismissively. You're transmuting it. You're transforming it into light. And so everything becomes a part of the healing process. And that means absolutely everything when you're working at that level, right? But until you can work at that level, you have to say, this is too overwhelming. This is too intense. You create boundaries. You push things away that are, bringing us into the darkness. And I also, we can open up that, but I also, before we do, I saw the movie Into the Wild. That was such a profound movie for me, 20 years ago, whenever it came out, 15 years ago, for my partner. We connected around that movie. It sounds like, have you seen it?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's your life, but you didn't eat the poisonous
I didn't
You know,
die.
and you didn't die. You made it out alive.
That's
And
right.
so,
That's
you know,
right.
that must have been
Much
really close,
not
though,
as such an
with Lyme
interesting
disease.
story.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Well, what a
Yeah.
profound, beautiful cautionary tale, but also he wasn't just a cautionary tale. He was that, but he was also an inspiration. Usually cautionary tales
Sure.
are not inspirations. They're just like, that's setting an example of what I don't want. But he was both. Yeah, it was a really beautiful story. So anyways, I'll turn the microphone back over to you now for a bit.
For sure, like that impulse that I can't remember the guy's name, but for sure that drove him out of the urban centers. And unfortunately, he didn't have mentorship really, and that was the part that was missing.
There you
and
go.
What happened.
He was searching for that too, in a way, wasn't he?
He was searching for it. That's right.
Yeah, and he went into the wasteland that you describe, and he didn't find it because it didn't have it. And I suppose that's.
And
I'm just picking this
and
up
it
now.
really
That's
was
the tragic.
It
Yeah.
really, yeah, and it really was that much harder to find 30, 40 years ago when that happened to him. And for myself, I mean, there was just so few alternatives out there, you know? Like, I mean, there was this guy, Tom Brown, you know, from the States, New Jersey, kind of wilderness teacher. Anyways, without getting into him, he was kind of like the only show in town in terms of a way that you could kind of connect in with these First Nations traditions. And again, he was like a white guy. There's lots of stuff that's come up about him in his school. But just to say, one of the other things I do talk about in the book is that, you know, like coming from that place of deprivation, we see a First Nations person, you know, whether they're Mayan or whether they're Algonquin or whether they're, you know, from Central America or whatever. And we are kind of like, okay, I want to learn from you. But the reality is for really traditional people, they have very little motivation to interact with us. And if they actually did, a lot of the time, we wouldn't be able to absorb the information because we don't have the capacity of thought. It hasn't been developed, the indigenous self, the indigenous brain in ourselves. So they would say stuff and it would just go right over our head. And so we need intermediate teachers, and they've been absolutely crucified in our culture, right? So people
How do you mean by that? Crucified by like through
social media canceled.
Oh, okay. Right. I haven't come across any of that, and I'm sure I will someday.
Right.
Because
Well,
I run a sweat lodge. It's in the Lakota tradition. You know, I went through all of the rites of passage. I was following the direction exactly how I was meant to begin because it was really important to me to do that. But it's, I'll speak really bluntly. The people that are critical of that, what's it called? What is the term when you're stealing the indigenous
appropriation.
Appropriation. Okay.
Yeah.
So the attack of appropriation comes through a person who's suffering from colonization, because it's an us versus them construct, and that's a colonized construct. So it's fully on a level of irony, but it's also an awkward, because there is elder wisdom to be passed down, which is to be like, look at your privilege, take accountability for that. There's so many things that need to be, that if an individual that has privilege, color of skin being completely arbitrary, but privilege is not arbitrary, for that to be
true.
fully, take accountability for that. And again, like if you don't, like you said, if the teachings are going over your head and you think that you're receiving the teachings, but you're actually not, also from the point of view of an elder, highly problematic when we're trying to preserve something that's sacred. And you may be doing something to impede the preservation of something sacred. I emphasize maybe, because you'd have to be really clear around your example of whether that was true or not. And when you get into the distortion of perception of appropriation or cancel culture, which comes out of anger, comes out of, this was taken from me, and there's no fucking way that you're going to take anything else from me, which is warranted to a degree, but we have to be very careful because you don't want to keep the settler consciousness and the colonized consciousness alive. Like, we're not trying to keep this thing, alive and well. So why are we keeping people from this wisdom? So we have to, it's a very nuanced thing, but it takes elder consciousness and to find out, true elders. The most, sacred minds, the most evolved minds, the most profound thinkers that I've come across have been Indigenous people. And they've been the people that have suffered the most also. That
And
much is
might I
very
add,
true, but yeah.
and might I add, the most generous.
Yeah. Well, for sure. Yeah.
Incredible,
But like
man. Incredible generosity. I mean, I talk about
when you
this
find the
stuff
depth.
in my book. I'm really after this stuff because what I'm after in the book is things that are keeping people away from this spirituality. And so
Fear.
there's quite a huge spectrum, but this whole political correctness, and I talk about it like I talk about many other things in this book, which was, it was an amazing tool. It helped change our culture. It helped women reclaim some of their power, but then it's kept going and the worm turned. And then now it's actually become a destructive tool, this whole political correctness and stuff. So, and this happens over and over again. I talk about Christianity. I talk about Marxism. I talk about all these things that were brilliant in their inception. Then when it gets dogmatized and all this stuff happens, the original thing gets lost.
Yeah.
Right. And this is happening ubiquitously in our culture as the original things are lost, you know, we're trying to reclaim them.
I was talking the last podcast that I did. I'm really interested in getting a little deeper into the original teachings of Christ, differentiating those teachings from Christianity. So the term Christianity, for whatever reason, doesn't speak to me at all. I have no interest in being part of a subsect of a population that identifies in a certain way because of why. That's the question that I come back to is like, what's the real reason for that? Does that label give us? And, to be able to say, that we follow the teachings of Christ. For me, that's a very different thing today, and it becomes a very important distinction. Losing the original thing, it couldn't be a more glaring example of that. And so if we have the Indigenous teachings now, it's very important when we're on our path, if we're trying to be of service, to be very discerning around who we listen to and who we take feedback from, because there's a lot of trauma, informed responses. And if you have been part of that colonial paradigm, in my opinion, that's a of keeping a system operational beyond the as a priority that goes beyond the prioritizing the human beings,
That's for sure.
across the board. And so if you are, that means you've been wounded if you believe it, if you buy into that fear-based system. And so it becomes an us versus them and a system of power. You have it or they have it. And so if you're a part of that construct, you're not, those aren't the elder teachings. Those aren't the Indigenous teachings. And so if you're Native and you're posturing that way, then you have to take a good look in the mirror. If you are trying to bring those traditions into the light, and you may not be, you may just be looking for some fucking power for once in your life. And that, and that may be okay with you. And that's none of my business, but I'm not going to listen to criticism that may come from that position. But
I mean, this is a really big topic, and I'm not even sure this is what we want to be talking about, but it is what we're talking about. So I just have at least one more thought about it. No, so like when you're working with a tradition, like maybe you're working with Cree people or something in Alberta.
Yeah, well, and this is another layer of sort of the complexity of it, is that I work primarily with Cree people in Alberta. But the tradition that I work specifically with alongside them is Lakota. And that comes through the Shipibo tradition. I have to be really specific. Yeah,
but for them it's related because they're just above.
Depends who you ask.
They moved back and forth.
If you ask a Lakota person, they may not think so. Yeah. Like a Lakota person from Pine Ridge, they may not think so. Yeah. And I've heard that before too, is that, if they had their way, it would all just be Lakota people. But they are, the elders of that tradition understand that the medicine of the Sundance.
Okay, so just to say,
yeah.
Where I'm going here is that we're not able all to work with Cree elders or with ayahuasqueros, that's not for everybody. Exactly. And it's also it's their spiritual path. And so you as a practitioner can say, I'm teaching this path, this is my path, and you're covered and all that stuff. But when do we get to talk about the sacred white road. I make this joke that I've followed the sacred red road for so long. I worked my way all the way back around to the sacred white road. And it's true. I had to walk that path for lots of years. And I was both on the path like you are and good. And I was also one of these people who would be accused of appropriation. And so when I started doing my teachings 20 or so years ago, I also did sweat lodges because they're a powerful, powerful tool. And I had done tons of them with elders, but I was not trained or sanctified to do it. And when I spoke to an elder and told them I was doing this, they said, don't do that. And I stopped immediately. And I haven't
Stop
done one
doing.
since.
Oh, you mean like leading them yourself?
Leading them.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just to say,
Yeah.
we're not infallible. We have to trip and fall in this attempt to go for something. And then now in the school, I think part of the big attraction for people to the school is I don't speak from any of those traditions. I speak from my heart. And I talk about Buddhist stuff and Vedic stuff, and I talk about First Nation stuff from the north, from the south. I talk about everything I've been exposed to because that's all become little pieces of how I've made this whole again, how I've made the world whole again and sacred. So now I just have to speak of it from my heart. And that's all I have to do. I don't have to stand on anyone else's platform. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a First Nations person. I'm a full-on colonial white person. But I spend a whole chapter in this book talking about what it is to be white and how the fallacy of that was created. And then what are the actual origins of so-called white culture? Nobody talks about these things, and I know about them, so I kind of just downloaded it all in this book. I'm like, people got to know this stuff. And
Yeah,
the
they do.
genetics and all this stuff that's being researched has turned our human migrations upside down. We knew shit because of course we knew shit. We were totally coming from this colonial perspective. Now the actual science is turning all our beliefs about that stuff upside down. And it's incredibly confirming this thing that I postulate in the book. And everything I write about in the book, I provide no evidence for. I don't feel I have to. You either understand me and then you get it, or you don't, in which case, feel free to research it. Use the words I've given you in the book, type them into Google, and you will find all the archaeological references and all that stuff. But I'm not into proving anything in that kind of step-by-step kind of academic way, trapping people. What I'm into is to evoking things. I want to wake people up. I want to crack the eggs so that they can perceive things themselves and work with what they're perceiving and not always be working secondhand information. Coming
Absolutely.
back to ourselves is such a long journey. And to be able to actually trust what we're intuiting and feeling and articulate it takes years and years of practice, right? Because we're so
and
trained out of it.
And everyone's path is different. But that is ultimately the journey that we're all on. Yeah, coming back to ourselves, like what is true for us on the deepest level. So I would like to delve deeper into the book and what you're talking about. I think that we talked for half an hour, which has been a perfect segue. And now let's delve into that. I suppose, are we talking about a reclamation of an identity that maybe looks a little bit similar, and maybe we're looking for a different word that perhaps doesn't even exist, to the reclamation of a native origin of somebody with white skin that is leaving behind a system that no longer serves them and is otherwise the only way to be identified by native people and other people ostensibly without, this term of, what does it mean to be white and indigenous without being indigenous, without taking something away from a different group of people who are also different from us.
Yes.
So it is a different category altogether, but we're talking about native identity, I believe. Yeah. So, in terms of delving into your book and what you've discovered, what can you share about that?
Yeah, I kind of start from the start. I talk about these tools that have been found that are 3.3 million years old and weren't even by our species. And then I talk about tools that we have that are 280,000 years old that are from our species, and just how many human species there were, right? And we're the only ones left. But there was probably dozens worldwide of human species. So just to say, I start the book with this stuff just to say we know so little. We have less than 1% of our history as human beings, like the last couple thousand years, and even that's pretty dicey. So we've been around for at least 300,000 years in the form that we're in. And we lived as indigenous people for 99.9% of that time. All of us.
Exactly.
Right? It's only this very
so much
recent
in
little,
me.
this little thin layer that we're calling something other than,
Totally.
So just to say, I try to humble people right from the start in terms of what we know. Then I talk about other cultures and how they understood the procession of the equinox, which is a 2,100-year period. And they understood that there's been many worlds evoked by different processions, different astrological alignments, and they've risen up and they've collapsed and risen up and collapsed. And so we look at things like some of these monuments in Central America, for example, and we're like, oh, it must have been alien people, aliens that came, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's such blatant prejudice towards indigenous people, as though nobody else but us could have created these technologies at a previous age, at a previous time. Like, we're so arrogant that we think aliens came. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just can't believe how people ran with this stuff.
And it goes beyond, I just want to add one thing, which is a teaching that I received about a very particular type of construction in, maybe it was Mayan or it might have been Inca, but it was something that the settlers, we couldn't get our heads around, like through the science that we have today. And what I was told by the teacher in Peru was that it was through a vision through the plants. It might have been ayahuasca, it might have been something else, but it was through communication with the plants where the people were told how to use the very specific beak of a specific bird and heat it up, and it was able to get hotter than the stone that they were working with, and it was able to create the carvings that were then, otherwise the people were unable. So it is like we're talking about, it's not just not having credit for indigenous people, but the wisdom that they carried because of their connection to the spirit of the plants and all around them, their connectivity to everything. So that's what we're not seeing and giving credit to, right? It's just, the whole package. Yeah.
For sure. The stone people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're the poor, or for those, the power of the grandfathers.
That's exactly.
Man, oh man.
The voices and messages that come through and the love that can come through.
Exactly.
It's out of this world.
We have no explanation for any of those things, right? And so they don't exist. This is the whole thing with the Western reality, is if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. You're just making it up. We can't accept the unseen world. So again, I kind of would reiterate that in a sense, there may have been astral consciousness from the star people that came into us that have taught us various things, like maybe even agriculture and different things have kind of tipped us off in the right direction. Because of course the plant people are directly connected to the star people. I had this vision years ago.
Totally.
Kava Kava, actually. It was back in the Kava Kava days when everyone was doing lots of that. And I was like, I don't feel anything. I'm going to go to bed. And I went to bed and I had this incredible dream. And off the tip of each leaf of each plant was this fine, fine, luminous line that went up to each stars. And I could see the constellations that each plant was connected to and stuff, So I'm kind of veering off there. But just to say...
No, but that's on point. That's on point. Yeah.
That consciousness is accessible for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we have to get out of our own way,
Mm-hmm.
over and over again.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it sure takes a lot to get out of it. Like
For sure, like
it takes a lot of
deprogramming.
dedication. Exactly. So your desire or whatever drove you to spend all that time in the wilderness, that was a big sacrifice that you made through a certain lens, and a very important one that you made in order to start that process.
Definitely. That was the ante up. That was like your time in. And you have to put your time in somehow, That's for sure. Whether you're in a tradition or whether you're somehow eking it out on your own path, you have to put your time in. And that's a
It's a
really
rite of
interesting
passage.
thing with the school, like our words are filters, right? And so what people understand and can kind of sink through, as opposed to just having a surface reading on, is your people. And so the people who come to the school are not beginners. I've become a teacher of teachers.
Yeah, right.
Everybody who comes to the school
relate to
is
that.
already well on the path. They just need some bigger picture and a little bit adjusting and things like that, And so I've come to realize that when I was earlier in my journey and I still had the beginner mind, lots and lots of beginners. I get people right out of college and, that kind of stuff, right? Like young people. Now, as I've gotten older and that kind of, the beginner mind, you just can't even remember what you were thinking 30 years ago or whatever, 40 years ago. Again, it's all just fiction, kind of, like I don't really remember it. And so other new people are coming along and then they're teaching the new people. But then somebody maybe like yourself or myself who's a little further down the way, they're going to teach the people who are halfway down the way, and so on and so on. And so it keeps changing, and I really, I embrace this feeling of that's, really come over me in the last maybe 5 years of being invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
All I have to do is talk. I just have to open my mouth because I've had so much experience. I'm so steeped in the spiritual reality and in working with the plants and all that stuff. I don't have to try. I don't have to bend over. I don't have to plan anything. I don't have to do anything. Just my talking creates an opening for people and shifts them. And it's not an arrogant thing. It's nothing. It's just something I've slowly come to accept, because I have self-esteem issues. I have problems just like everybody else. But that's all just me. This other thing that I'm passing on is so much bigger. And I don't get it my own way anymore for it. And I don't care if you even believe me or not. I'm just putting seeds into you. I'm the sacred gardener. I'm just planting seeds, right?
Beautiful.
And if you develop some fertile soil and some moisture within yourself, then those seeds will sprout. And then suddenly what I was actually talking about will come to you. And it might be 10 years down the line, And this has all happened to me. That's how I know it goes that way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as teachers, we have to not be attached to any kind of outcome. And that can be tricky too for me, on the nervous system of wanting to see that there's some kind of an impact for my self-esteem issues. But, that being the practice of letting that go, if those feelings and other feelings, just being in relationship, being in the world, having children, I go do a reset in the lodge or a ceremony, and it's, I reconnect to what's true, and back we go.
Yep, me too.
Because that other stuff is not true. It's just
absolutely
clutter. It's
and you
distortion.
absolutely need your tools, whether it's meditation or sacred use of substances or whatever. You need a way back. We always need to find our way back over and over and over and start over and over again. I mean, this is what the Buddhist teachers talk about, is like, in a sense, there is no advanced meditation. It's all the exact same thing right from the start, right? It's just quieting the mind. It's such a simple thing, but it takes so many years to kind of be able to do that and watch yourself think, to be the mind within the mind, to be that part of yourself.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of existence, ultimately. I couldn't imagine.
Well, and what I put forward in the book is that it's through these very, very deep connections, what I call divine marriages, that our culture has been infused and that we've become what we are. Everything we are is through these divine marriages. We didn't have any of this stuff. So I start right from talking about our verticality and how we became vertical beings. That was through our marriage to the trees, through our marriage to sticks.
Oh, okay. Can you go into that a little bit as an example?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? I mean, a stick is such an incredibly useful thing. And obviously, if you were on all fours, you can't really carry sticks, or not for any kind of distance. And
Right.
so there's been a lot of speculation about the primate family and how we became upright. And the general speculation has been about children, is about you could carry a baby and, be vertical. There's another thing in terms of calories of efficiency, that if you can walk on 2 feet, it's actually more efficient and all that stuff. So there are multiple explanations, but there's this weird thing that if you give a child a stick, like 2 months old or 3 months old, I think, you put a stick in their hands, they can hold their own weight. Like you can actually pick them up off the ground. So like somehow our hands are made to hold sticks. We evolved this whole opposable thumb thing and everything for sticks. And so
Right.
the power of verticality, the power of the trees, right? Which is this vertical force, and it's pushing up against the horizontal reality of life. And in a sense, I see it very much as a masculine force, the verticality. And so when we embraced that, and we started to carry sticks, we literally were transformed by them. We married them, and our spine started to straighten out more. And then we used the sticks to walk, and we used the sticks to dig. We used the sticks to hunt. We used the sticks to get through thick brush. We used sticks for everything, right? And then so in the book, I go from there to the stone people and our marriage to the stone people. And then I talk about the kind of higher aspects of culture, of weaving, of pottery, of agriculture, and how all these marriages came about.
I'm going to let you in on a secret. And it's not really, I've only told maybe one other person. So it's funny that I'm going to tell you right now because we're obviously on a podcast. But I had a vision. This is through ayahuasca, and it's come up more than once. It's come up a couple of times. So I'm like, oh, geez. And it's a bit of a head scratcher. But what I was shown, in no uncertain terms, is that we didn't evolve from primates, that we actually evolved from birds. So if you can imagine birds descending and ostriches, and we've always had hands from the different point of view.
Right.
So, and I'm not really sure how that, I mean, that's neither here nor there in terms of what you just shared.
Yeah.
That our relationship with the others,
Yeah.
And it's, when, medicine teachings like that, they're always for the soul first and foremost. And so you tease them back. And if they happen to have a reflection in reality, so be it. But then if they do, you realize sort of that it's not all that important anyways, that it's the soul growth that is what's important. But,
Well,
and
and
the
when you
metaphor and the
say,
symbolism and
just to pass something on about that, you heard of this book called Return of the Bird Tribes? And Carrie?
Okay, no.
That would absolutely dovetail with what you're talking about, because he's talking about the consciousness that the birds carry and how this is the bridge for us.
Yeah, right. That certainly applies
Anyways.
to the indigenous traditions, like the eagle being the closest to God, but also that view, that purview of seeing everything, and then the different animals and how they have, the different wisdom that they carry, and that we can tap into that wisdom or learn from that about our own inner wisdom. Yeah.
And the birds are always talking to us, right? They're always telling us about the spiritual realm, what's going on that we can't
That's
see.
right.
And so they are like the
Exactly.
informants. They're like this channel between the etheric and between our physical, the bird
Yeah.
people. So that ties perfectly in with your vision.
I'll have to look into that. I'm
That
definitely
it's not
curious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was I don't want to lose track here because that was a beautiful example that really resonated. What else can you tell us about the book? And, to go into a bit of detail that way about where you go with these analogies and with these insights with the book. Does anything else come to mind?
Even though I'm talking about the reclamation of seed spells, and by that I mean these divine marriages, these moments where a deeper consciousness ethereal consciousness merged with our consciousness, and from which culture was birthed. These different activities, these different skills, these different visions that created our culture, and that we're still, I emphasize this over and over again, we're still 100% riding on those sacred marriages that were created. We haven't created any new foods in thousands of years because they were through a sacred marriage. They were created. We're not able to do it now. We've lost the ability. And certainly as a culture, we've lost the ability. So over and over again, I'm talking about these things. And really in the book, I'm not just conjuring old spells. I'm dispelling the myths that we live by. I'm equally interested in deprogramming, dispelling these spells that have caught us into our thinking. So one of the chapters in the book is about the Elohim. So these people have been called various things over time. More recently, meaning 2,000-3,000 years ago, they were called the Anunnaki. And there's this whole bunch of people out there who believe that the Anunnaki seeded humanity as slaves to dig gold, and there's this whole kind of new age myth about it and all that stuff.
I've heard that. Yeah.
I'm dispelling that myth.
Good.
I am. I'm going after it in a big way because I believed it myself 40 years ago.
Okay.
So I can speak to it in that way. So I watched this documentary.
It works as a metaphor for colonization and, and the wool that's been pulled over our eyes, which that really has happened. Right.
Definitely.
And I would argue too, is just like, does it matter who colonized us, whether it's aliens or people that right in front of us without even knowing it, whether they're conscious or not, does it matter? Because I don't know. I have the freedom to decolonize myself. I've been doing it for 10 years. Nobody's tried to stop me.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'll let you continue.
Anyways, yeah. So there was this guy named Riel, and then there was a whole cult up here in Montreal, actually, in the 70s, and he channeled the Elohim, these etheric beings. So I kind of thought it was interesting, and I just kind of thought it was all bullshit, but I thought it was interesting, and I really liked the word Elohim. And so I started to say it over and over again, just like the next day or whatever. And then I flip open this book in the middle of the night. This is like the day after I saw the movie. Never seen the word before in my life, and the word's there on the page, Elohim. And what it talked about is the shift that the Elohim is the holy host. And it wasn't singular, it was plural. And then they turned it into a singular, and they took one God out of that host, which was Yahweh, and said, this is God. But previous to that, the understanding was the Elohim is God, which was plural. The ancient, pre-Sumerian texts that talked about the Elohim saw them as a host, like a pantheon of intermediary beings who worked with creation.
Okay.
Right? And kept everything balanced and all that.
Okay.
And then it got dogmatized by this, the early Semitic priests, before it was Judaism, but just before that. And they were trying to turn everything around from the goddess culture into patriarchal culture. So they created our myth of Eden. That whole thing is all about propaganda, right? Like the snake, the naked woman, the tree-bearing fruit. These are all symbols of the goddess. They were all very positive earth symbols. So these same fuckers who kind of created that myth that's created our whole belief system were also the ones who went, okay, that plural thing is not going to work for us. We need to talk about one God. Let's pick a vengeful, fucking powerful war god, and we'll make him the deal. And we'll just start talking about the Elohim as though it's just him.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how Judaism was created.
Am I missing something? Where did the alien colonizer come in?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I talk about this in the book, is he took it and ran, right? Like, it's like,
okay.
We don't believe in anything that's not physical. So rather than going, okay, maybe we were infused with the consciousness of the Elohim,
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it would have been women.
Mm-hmm.
It's been turned into this actual physical thing of impregnancy to some kind of ape-like being that created us and all this stuff.
Okay.
And there was this book called Chariot of the Gods that was all about this stuff in the 70s. And it's formed our whole belief system now. Now there's all these pop movies and everything that has these same ideas that physical aliens came here, impregnated female monkeys or whatever, and created humans from that. And it wasn't physical, but in a sense it may have happened, but it was ethereal. And women did bring us culture. They brought us language. They brought us pottery. They brought us weaving. Those were the very foundational stones of culture.
Yeah.
So it's this misinterpretation. We think everything has to be physical. We can't accept any truth that's not physical.
It's like in the Lakota tradition, Tonka Shila references grandfather, and it's actually used as a reference for your grandfather, but it's also a reference for the grandfathers that are in the rocks, that are in the lodge, and they come as spirits, as helpers. But the connection, so I was under the impression that it also was synonymous with Great Spirit, with Creator, depending on the context. And it turns out that that's sort of true. But the broader scope of it is that Wakantanka, which is Great Mystery, is more succinctly related to Creator, because it is a great mystery. God is just too much to fathom, to take in all at once. It's all of the things all at once. But to have a masculine connection draws us to the sky and to the sun with grandfather, and then have the grandmother as the earth, for the human mind, because it is all for the human mind. It's all through creation, but it gives us orientation specifically for our geographical context, like what's appropriate for us, where we live in the times that we live in, the animals that we're hunting, the way that we need to organize for our survival, and to also have a connection to spirit. I believe that geography sort of is one of the primary differentiators of, from one tradition to the next. But where I was going with this, though, is just the attempt to bring cohesiveness, like to understand something that's not understandable, is almost hilarious, but it's also beautiful, because it just shows our vulnerability, and it shows, we're wanting to use these minds for good. Like we're wanting to, I guess it's like creating, like going back to where we started, creating an ideology, but being able to let it go. So creating these stories and creating, different ways of trying to understand what is ultimately unfathomable seems like a very human thing to do and a very natural thing to do. But again, you got to have a way to come back to a humble place. Like if you don't have a ritual, if you don't have a ceremony that just kicks your ass sometimes and gets you out of your head, you can get stuck there for a fucking lifetime. And I just, I feel for the people that do get caught up, in that hysteria of conspiracy theories, to the degree where conspiracy theories are useful to a certain extent. But the great mystery always reminds us that it's a great mystery. So be careful of what you get attached to.
Well, and it's right in the religions from the start. You weren't allowed to speak the name.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you said it, you made it into a form, and you've already lost it as soon as you name the thing. Right?
But as soon as you have a man or a woman,
we knew all this,
But as soon as you have somebody telling another person what to do, they've lost their way, right? And so it can only be an elder cautionary, just, in my experience, it's important not to name and to not be attached to that person. When you get control tactics, you're also tethering to something that's not real, and it's becoming darkness. So,
I mean, interestingly, right? Like, if you think about your ayahuasca trips, if you think about all your journeying, if I think about all my journeying, never met that God guy.
Yeah.
I never have.
And you have. And yet you have all day long.
No, but that's what I'm saying, is that this idea of a singular God is something that we contrived, and then through our interpretation and our interaction with First Nations people here in North America, this whole idea of that Wankantanka and that the Great Spirit are the same thing, and that this is the same as our God, is fabrication. First Nations people did not believe in this single deity. They were plural. And in your experience with ayahuasca, I think you can speak to the plurality of spirit
Yeah.
It's not just one spirit. I mean, yes, there's the grandfather teacher, the ayahuasca, but there's also all the other spirits that are surrounding us, right?
That's right.
And that's
Yeah.
the
And they're all a
Elohim.
part of Great Spirit, but
Yeah,
somehow
sure.
there's something more and beyond that's also not comprehensible and is worth bowing to, in my
My
experience
God,
too.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
Yeah. Just like the awesomeness of it all is all contained. How it can be all contained in love? And, getting my head around that took some time too, but I believe truly, like, I know that that's true, that it is all held in love. And so, which takes the responsibility off of me. I can just show up as best I can and be totally okay with that. 100%
Well, that's
okay
it.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and with these teachings that I'm passing on, these stories here, I'm not trying to make you believe what I believe. I'm trying to break down your system of belief so that you're more open to what's actually there.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not
they're coming to you.
interested in
People are
being,
coming to
I'm
you.
not,
So,
yeah. I'm not interested in
yeah.
being a guru or a laying out any kind of thing that can be turned into dogma. I reject all of that. I totally reject it.
Totally. Be in the
That's
heart.
just trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Well,
I've done it
this
other
is the
lifetimes.
instrument. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
I would like, with our hour, it's time to wrap it up, but I would love to have another chat with you at some point, and I'd like to talk more about the plants at your feet and the ones that you harvest and that you work with and the relationships that you have there. That feels like a part two to
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
that would be great. I had a couple herbalist appointments this morning, so we could have swung that way, but
Yeah.
it's something that needs to be talked about because there is this huge interest in herbs and
Yeah.
people go down that route, but then they get shifted into the allopathic understanding of them, the phytochemistry and all that stuff, and it's not what herbs are about.
Okay.
They're not pharmaceuticals. They're living
Okay.
beings. They're just
Right.
like people.
This is like you just gave the preview for the part two.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
Yeah, sure. I'd love to.
comments? Any closing comments for the, that you'd like to just close with that you feel like, anything you didn't touch on?
Well, lots I didn't touch on, but I guess I
Yeah.
would say to folks, it's a lot to come to the school without really having a deep trust or a deep connection in somebody like me. Because I'm, white skin, all that stuff. I'm like an old white guy. So I get it if you're feeling reluctant, but what I would encourage you to do is listen to this podcast, listen to other podcasts I've done, watch my videos, and feel your heart and what it's telling you. And if you're feeling the draw to come to the school, then come to the school. And you won't be trapped. And it's not a cult. You don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah.
But I will change your perception of reality.
Right.
I know I can do that with people. And it's 4 sessions over 2 years. So it's not just a one-off thing. I take you in step by step, each session deeper and deeper. And the third session, we start working with the plant people because they're not ready to talk to plant people until you know a whole bunch of other stuff first. So we have a whole year of preparation before that can even happen. It's essential. Yeah.
And that's the sacredgardener.ca.
That's right. I think we got the .com too, but we'll go for the
Okay.
.ca.
Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes also. Make sure
That'd be
people
great.
can get to the right place. Well,
That'd be
thank you very
great.
much for your time. It was a pleasure to
Thank
meet
you,
you.
Mark.
That all happened. Yeah, we met and then we did a podcast. And I like these podcasts because I get to go into the places that I like to go anyways, when I meet people and to explore, kind of just get right into into the roots as much as we can. And
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And always with the cross-pollinating of ideas, and I always get something from it, and I'm sure,
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
folks got something from that.
Yeah.
Some things to think
100%.
about.
I know I did. Yeah. In closing, thank you everyone for listening today. This is Mark A. Lewis, guest Stephen Martyn. This is the Sacred Village Podcast. Over and out.
I lay my head down.
Check out my lovely partner's music, Kristina Jessen, at KristinaJessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing. You can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day.